Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the third week of Supernatural Folklore. I want to apologize, first of all, for getting this posted so late this week. But we, like everybody else, have had a lot going on this weekend. Um, so I am sorry that it is Sunday night and I am just now getting the week's work posted. Please take some time tomorrow to sharpen your saw, as they say at my daughter's school. Get a little rest and relaxation and be ready to dig in to classes for the next week. Um, I want to start this week by finishing up on what I didn't get to discuss completely last week. We've been laying the foundation of what the academic study of folklore involves. And last week we broke down the three broad categories or genres um, that folklore is often broken down into. And if you'll remember, those are narrative or oral folklore, material culture, and performance or customary folklore. McNeil added a third category to this, which was belief. And we also discussed how folklore overlaps in many of these categories. And some of your classmates did a great job of explaining this in one of the questions last week about Bloody Mary. If you did not get an opportunity to read some of those analyses, that might be a good thing for you to go back and do this week. I also talked about the fact that functionalism is one framework that we use to analyze folklore, and I just mentioned that quickly last week. A few of you gave a shot at analyzing some stories based on the function. Basically, functionalism is what it sounds like. It looks at the ways that folklore functions for cultures who share it. It's a theory that was originated by a guy named William Bascom way back in 1956. And so rather than have you to read his very long article describing what the functions of folklore are, I am going to give you that rundown in this lecture. Now, certainly there are critiques of the theory's usefulness, but it is a good place for us to start as we begin to think like folklorists. William Bascom's Four Functions of Folklore says that we can look at a piece of folklore that a culture shares and understand what that piece of folklore does for the people in that culture. He says that folklore fills one or more of the following functions. The first of those functions is validation and justification. So he says that folklore serves to validate and justify institutions and rituals. It tells people why they should do the things they do and why things are the way they are. So this might be seen in a story about the guy with the hook hand on Lover's Lane, all right? And if you've heard that story, it has appeared in several, it's a regular movie trope, television show trope, but the guy escapes from the mental institution and he goes to Lover's Lane and he has a hook for a hand and he catches a couple making out and he either assaults them in some way or kills them or something, right? That piece of folklore may be told in order to validate why parents tell you that you shouldn't go parking, right? Another function of folklore is education. Um, in this case, folklore teaches members of the culture the values and morals of the culture, and it reinforces those morals and values. So you might find this again in the story with the hook hand, where you have a cultural value that says people should not have sex before marriage, right? And it's reinforcing that bad things happen to you if you do that. You can also find this particular educational function in fairy tales, fables, lots of other kinds of legends, contemporary legends. The third function of folklore is escape from repression. Folklore offers an escape from the repressions of a society in a way that the culture generally accepts. Examples of this might be jokes or revenge tales in contemporary legend. Usually you can pretty much, you can say a lot of things and say that you are joking, and those things may be excused by listeners. The fourth function of folklore that William Bascom gives is social control. And he says that folklore often provides social control or social pressure on members to conform to the expectations of the society. Now, this forms cohesiveness. This is how we keep communities together. So examples of this can be found in contemporary legends, jokes, folk similes, things like that. So, by looking at these different functions, Bascom says that the values and attitudes of a culture are revealed. So how does that work? So let's look at an example. Let's see if we can determine functions. I'm going to tell you a story, and I want you to think through this story about Bascom's four functions and what this story could mean for the folks who tell it. And I will tell you that this particular story came to me originally through a Reddit thread. After 37 years of marriage, Jake dumped his wife, Edith. Hang on, I've lost my place. Sorry, guys. After 37 years of marriage, Jake dumped his wife Edith for his young secretary. Now, some accounts explicitly state that Edith had supported Jake in the early days of founding his business or while he was attending school, and that she was very invested in the choices made for the house. These things can also be implied by the fact that they were married for 37 years, which is a very long time. After Jake dumped her, his new girlfriend demanded that they live in Jake and Edith's multi-million-dollar home. Since Jake had better lawyers, he prevailed, and he gave Edith, his now ex-wife, just 3 days to move out. She spent the first day packing her belongings into boxes and crates. On the second day, she had 2 movers come and collect her things. On the third day, she sat down for the last time at their beautiful dining room table by candlelight, put on some soft background music, and feasted on a pound of shrimp, a jar of caviar, and a bottle of Chardonnay. When she finished, she went into each and every room and stuffed half-eaten shrimp shells into the hollow of all of the curtain rods. Then she cleaned up the kitchen and left. When Jake returned with his new girlfriend, all was bliss for a few days. Then slowly, the house began to smell. They tried everything: cleaning, mopping, airing the place out. Vents were checked for dead rodents and carpets were cleaned. Air fresheners were hung everywhere. Exterminators were brought in to set off gas canisters, during which they had to move out for a few days. And in the end, they even replaced the expensive wool carpeting. Nothing worked. People stopped coming over to visit. Repairmen refused to work on the house. The maid quit. And finally, they could not take the stench any longer and decided to move. A month later, even though they had cut their price in half, they couldn't find a buyer for their stinky house. Word got out, and eventually even the local realtors refused to return their calls. Finally, they had to borrow a huge sum of money from the bank to purchase a new house. Edith called Jake and asked how things were going. He told her the saga of the rotting house. She listened politely and said that she missed her old home terribly and would be willing to reduce her divorce settlement in exchange for getting the house back. Knowing his ex-wife had no idea how bad the smell was, he agreed on a price that was about 1/10 of what the house had been worth, but only if she were to sign the papers that very day. She agreed, and within the hour, his lawyers delivered the paperwork. A week later, Jake and his girlfriend stood smiling as they watched the moving company pack everything to take to their new home, including the curtain rods. So first, what's your response to the story? I want you to think about who has the power in this story and how they got that power. And then I want you to think about who you sympathize with in the story and why you sympathize with them. So this is a contemporary legend, like I said. It is in the subgenre of revenge tales. There are pro-revenge Reddits and the like. These kinds of stories make their way onto Facebook, onto Pinterest, onto everywhere. But what is this piece of folklore doing? So if we look at Bascom's 4 functions of folklore and we apply them to the story, we begin to see how we can use functionalism to see what the story does for the people who share it. So if we look at the function of validation and justification, this function isn't as prevalent in this particular story, but the story does function to validate that fidelity in a marriage is important, or else bad things can happen, and that if a person is betrayed, they are justified in retaliating against that betrayal. Edith was justified in doing something to get back at Jake and his new girlfriend, right? It also serves an educational function here. Values that we might be able to take from this vary based on your culture. So one value might be that women should not give up their independence for men because men might betray them and take something away from them that they care about. Another value might be don't commit adultery. Another value might be that revenge is a dish that's best served cold. Being patient and waiting is the best way to get what you want. There are others you can figure out, but you get the idea. This story also, if we look at the function of escape from repression, it's a revenge story. And who hasn't been treated badly and wanted the person that did it to get what they deserve? We can laugh at this, especially at the end. This guy thought he had all of this power over his ex-wife, and then in the end, she's the one who gets the house, and then he gets what he deserves, including the stinky curtain rods, right? And then we can also look at this as a function of social control, right? This provides different social control, again, depending on your culture and who you are. You could look at this and say that it provides the social control of being heteronormative. The couples here are male and female. You can also say that it functions as a social control of not committing adultery. Adultery leads to bad things happening. It could be that older women are more sophisticated than younger women or men in achieving goals. It could also be that being ingenious about your revenge is preferable, and not being discovered doing it is preferable. And it could also be that patience is a virtue when you need to get what you want. All right. So if we look at those different interpretations, do those seem to be consistent with your culture? So, yes, it is a kind of funny revenge story, but aside from that, it does tell us more subtle things about the culture that shares the story. This is not a comprehensive analysis of the story's functions, but it does, I hope, illustrate the ways that we can analyze something for its function. And as we go through the semester, we will apply functionalism in different ways, all right? 2 different pieces of folklore. This was an oral narrative piece of folklore, but you can also do this type of functional analysis on material culture, on performance or customary culture. So you can use this functionalism on lots of different things. So I want to move on to the readings quickly. First, I want to talk about Diane Goldstein's introduction to Out of the Ordinary. First, Diane Goldstein points out that conventional academic theory tends to treat belief in the supernatural as a survival, as something that's been left over from a more primitive culture that didn't have the scientific knowledge that it does now. And I think we talked about this a little bit last week. That carries with it the idea that as a culture becomes more knowledgeable, belief in the supernatural can be expected to decline. And belief in the supernatural is often treated as irrational or primitive, right? To illustrate this, she quotes Newbell Niles Puckett in saying, folk beliefs are found mainly with the uncultured and backward classes of society, white or colored, and it is to such retarded classes of society rather than to either racial group as a whole that reference is made. Now, granted, this quote is from 1931, and some ideas have changed since then, but Goldstein is arguing that they haven't changed all that much. That in general, there are groups of people who attribute supernatural belief to people who are not as educated, are not as sophisticated, and just don't know any better. She points out that these assumptions are problematic for a couple of reasons. She questions the ways in which supernatural beliefs are used to other groups of people. All right. For example, though here where she says they're attributed to uncultured and backward classes, those people over there, not us. Right? Those people believe in supernatural things, but not us, because we are somehow better than that, right? So this belief in the supernatural is used to other groups of people. She also says that these assumptions are ethnocentric, right? They assume that the investigators' beliefs are normal and true, and all other beliefs are aberrant or incorrect. And she also says that the investigator here presupposes that the beliefs are incorrect before they actually begin the investigation. For example, if they were looking at perhaps a poltergeist reporting, they operate from the assumption that it can't possibly be a poltergeist. It must be something else before they've actually done any real investigation at all. And so they find just about what they're looking for, which is never a really good way to begin an investigation. So she shows us through polling evidence that belief in the supernatural hasn't disappeared, even though many academics presuppose this resistance. And there's an article in Live Science that I usually post a link to, and it is, the article is called Americans' Beliefs in Paranormal. It's an infographic, and I can post that link for you. Goldstein also argues that these beliefs are not irrational, as it's supposed. By using case studies, she argues that people who share stories about experiences with the supernatural reveal reasoned considerations, and that they test alternatives to a supernatural explanation. Narrators who share personal stories of the supernatural often include the manner in which they try to reasonably explain or verify their experience. They may try to replicate the experience. They may try to look for rational explanations like a floor being unlevel, or a door latch being faulty, or a draft in the house. They may provide witnesses and supporting narratives of people who have had the same experience. She says these narratives tend to share, quote, tend to share a common, highly detailed, cautious, and even defensive structure. So narrators are conscious of the potential for being judged irrational, and therefore they assume a stance that anticipates the contestation of observations and conclusions. People who tell supernatural stories expect that they are going to be questioned, right? Their sanity may be questioned. And so they really try to head that off at the pass by detailing all of the actions that they took to try to ward off that "you're crazy" judgment, right? In other words, rather than being non-rational or crazy, these people are providing evidence that would, if it were regarding any other subject, be pretty persuasive to most researchers. Goldstein concludes that evidential criteria are central in supernatural experience narratives, right? People have to tell you evidentially what happened. And that narrators are often less concerned about convincing an audience that the event took place, and instead explain how it was that he or she came to understand what happened, and how it happened, and why it happened. She also claims that the reason these accounts are concerned with evidentiary material is because of modern science, not in spite of it, right? People go through this scientific method to try to discern what has happened or what they think has happened because they have a basic understanding of the scientific method. So it's not that they are, they are using that to try to explain the experience. And basically they come to the conclusion that there isn't a rational explanation for the thing, right? So I also want to discuss Hufford's traditions of disbelief. David Hufford is a very interesting folklorist. He's done a lot of work with Katrina survivor. No, wait, sorry. No, he does a lot of work in the medical profession with physicians in looking at the ways that physicians can treat their patients in a more culturally appropriate way. So here Hufford argues that traditions of disbelief are just as much a belief tradition as any other folk belief, and that these traditions are revealed by the presupposition that the beliefs under study are fundamentally incorrect. He points out the egocentricity of this, where people are like, I know what I know, and what you know, you only believe, right? He says that most people either believe there is or there is not a supernatural order. Although last week, this is one of the things that Barbara Walker cautioned us about. Belief is not an either or proposition. Or a switch that we turn on or off. People do hold supernatural beliefs at the same time that they believe in the explanations offered by science. Hufford here in this article seems to be more focused on those who disbelieve categorically. Hufford, one of the things Hufford points out is that science does not try to prove negatives. Physical science simply does not speak to interpretations which extend beyond the material universe, nor deal with data that refuse to be reconciled to that universe. So if science can't explain it, then they are not interested in proving that it's not true. In this way, he says that science doesn't really address what is understood to be something beyond this material world. And we'll talk a little bit about definitions of that at the end of this lecture. He does point out that there are some who believe that supernatural experiences just can't be explained by science yet. And this is what we mean when we talk about definitions of paranormal versus supernatural. And rather than save that to the end of the lecture, I'm going to go ahead and talk about that now. In the context of our class, when we discuss something that is attributed to a force beyond this realm or plane of existence and beyond or not subject to the laws of nature, we can describe that thing as being supernatural. All right? For example, you may believe in angels. And traditionally, angels reside in heaven, although sometimes they come and walk around on earth. Angels are attributed to God. They are his messengers. And God and angels exist in a realm that is outside of this. They exist in heaven. And that is outside of this earthly realm. Even though sometimes they interact with this earthly realm. God and angels are not subject to the laws of nature. They can fly, they can teleport, they can walk on water, they can do whatever they want, right? They can create the world in 7 24-hour days for some folks. And in this case, God and angels who exist in a realm beyond this, who are not subject to the laws of this universe, would be considered supernatural. All right? If we are talking about something that is attributed to a force that is beyond current scientific understanding, science would be able to explain it. It just isn't advanced enough to do so yet. That is when we would describe something as being paranormal. All right. So, for example, you may believe in aliens. And aliens exist in our universe. They are subject to the laws of nature of the universe. They just have abilities that have perhaps evolved differently, or they have different or more often more advanced understandings and use it in ways they use science. Our science might be able to catch up, and we might discover life somewhere else in the universe, but we just haven't been able to do it yet. And so in this case, aliens would be considered paranormal. There's something that science can't explain yet. But one day science will be able to. Right? Now, where we get tricky with this is where we talk about things that can be described in either way depending on your beliefs. Ghosts, for example, can be either paranormal or supernatural or both, depending on your particular beliefs. So if you believe that ghosts exist in a different realm than our own, even though they sometimes interact with it, and they defy the laws of nature by doing things like appearing and disappearing, then we can say that you believe that ghosts are supernatural, right? If you think that ghosts are residual energy that has been left over and didn't dissipate when someone died, or their energy imprinted on a place or a thing, but that through scientific advancement and study, we can someday explain why ghosts exist, then you could describe your belief as being paranormal. All right. And you may believe both things at the same time. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's just a difference in the way that we use those two words in folklore to talk about things that are supernatural or talk about things that are paranormal. And you may look at something like cryptids or Bigfoot or something like that, and describe those as paranormal. Those are things that science just isn't able to explain yet. And then you may look at things like telepathy or clairvoyance and believe that those are supernatural abilities, that they defy the laws of nature of this universe, right? But telepathy and clairvoyance might also be something that you feel like is something that has to do with how different people's brains function, and that science may one day be able to map that. So that might also be an area where you could define that as either supernatural or paranormal. Depends on your particular belief system. But let's get back to Hufford. Hufford says that there's a place for some of the traditional arguments for disbelief. There are some people who have lived and who have lied and perpetrated hoaxes regarding supernatural experiences. That does happen. But he also says that that doesn't mean that everyone who has these experiences are liars or are trying to defraud others. He also says that when people discuss experiences, they might be thought to be hallucinating or high or under stress, in that what they saw what they saw, but it was somehow in their head, or they interpreted the experience incorrectly. If it isn't a hallucination, it's generally assumed to be an illusion, a misperception of external stimuli. Hufford's point is that rationalism often presupposes that supernatural belief is not rational, when in fact most people who have had these experiences have tried to apply rational explanations to the experience and still find the experience is not satisfactorily explained. So in this way, Hufford is agreeing with Goldstein. Now, there is a place for ontological validity, guys, and the truthiness of something. And sometimes our hold on what can demonstrably be determined to be true or false gets a little shaky. I'm not trying to tell you those things don't matter. The truthiness, the ontological validity, it does matter. If you read the news or any mass media today, you know that there is a proliferation of misinformation, conspiracy, conjecture, and all the things. And that those things can be very damaging. But what Hufford and Goldstein are saying is that for a long time, people who talk about supernatural experiences were just assumed to be crazy or hallucinating or simple in that they didn't understand the science of something, or they're irrational. So Hufford and Goldstein are pointing out that those who report these experiences are not what they have been assumed to be. And that the tradition of disbelief is just as much a tradition as belief. All right? Even though many times disbelief has been assumed to be true. So Hufford and Goldstein are actually arguing for a more skeptical examination of both disbelief and belief. All right? Fabulous claims require fabulous evidence. But what I want you to understand is that there are a lot of people who tell a lot of stories. And I guess when people find out what it is that I do, generally they like to tell me a story. And generally, when they tell me a story, these are not people that I have any reason to disbelieve. They don't have any reason to lie to me. It's not going to make them look better or worse if they tell me their story. Um, and they might seem to be unlikely folks. I remember in particular a story that was told to me by a lady who worked at the college that I worked in Maryland. And she was the director of student life. She had several college degrees, very no nonsense, very practical woman. Not one that I would have thought would have been given to a lot of supernatural belief, but she had an experience in her home when she was moving out that she told me about, and she applied all the um, evidentiary explanation that she could. She checked the stairs, she checked doorways, she looked for other rational explanations for what happened, and she couldn't find one. And so generally when people share supernatural experiences, that's what it is, right? They've tried to apply rational explanations to what they've seen, but they just can't come up with a rational explanation that fits their situation. Um, so um, when we in this class we don't prove or disprove beliefs exist. Beliefs exist, right? And we don't prove or disprove whether they're true or false in this class. So I want you to keep in mind that, or try to keep an open mind. I will say that I'm a skeptic at heart. I do look for all possible rational explanations, but there are certainly things that happen that I don't have a really good rational explanation for. So I often say that I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't disbelieve in them either. So we'll continue to talk more about this throughout the semester. I've probably talked about it enough for today. Again, another lecture that's going to run 32 minutes. I'm sorry. But I do want you to take a look at the questions for this week. There's some on the reading. You also have quiz number 2 this week that has to be done before next Sunday at 11:59 p.m. It is in your week 2 folder, assignments folder. Please do not forget to do that. Thank you guys. If you have questions, please let me know in that questions and comments forum, and I will see you next week. Have a great week. Bye.